We have done a little bit of editing previously in Lightroom, and I'm going to do a little bit more, um, which hopefully will help you out as you continue with these assignments. There's a handout going through basic editing. I'm going to go through that here. You can follow along in the handout. I'll try to roughly follow the same things. First one, big one, right, is white balance. And we looked at that a little bit already. If I click on this white balance image, right, I can tell it's super, super yellow, orangey, nastiness. Not good. Let's fix it. Um, I'm in the library tab, right? The same options exist in the develop tab. The develop tab just has a slider so that we can do it a little bit more precisely, whereas in the library tab, my white balance has a drop down, also in the develop tab, and then underneath it goes by jumps, right? So I can jump this way to make it warmer, jump that way to make it cooler in big increments or smaller increments. Um, this seems pretty far off. I'm just going to go up here to white balance and try setting it to one of the other presets. Set it as tungsten. That looks pretty good, a little cool. I will set it to auto. Looks basically the same. Sounds good to me, right? Fine. If I go and look and develop, right, I can see it's sort of the numeric equivalent. I'm now at 2950 Kelvin, and my tint is at 0. Um, when we talk about white balance in the other clip, so this is your white balance, what it actually is, 2950. Do you need to know that? No, it doesn't really matter. If I were to drag the slider around, right, we can see, again, the white balance will change. If I want a little bit warmer, I can drag it to a slightly higher number, and boom, it's a little warmer. We can go now back to my library tab. I can hit G on the keyboard to get the grid view. Here is a picture that is this is just a tragedy. It really, really is. I would like to fix the white balance in this and also probably the exposure a little bit. I'm going to fix the white balance first because I can't really judge exposure when the white balance is so terrible. White balance is the first thing that you should fix. I mean, if there's a huge exposure thing, fix that first. But white balance is really going to be incredibly important for being able to tell what your exposure needs to have happen to it. It's really hard to judge something when the color is so off. In this case, I can go up here to auto white balance. Boom, that's pretty good. I could also hit W on the keyboard to get my white balance picker tool, right? That pops me into the develop module, you'll see. And because I happen to have a color chart in the frame, what a coincidence, I can click on a neutral gray there, and it actually warms it up a little bit compared to what it was from auto. So this should be a totally neutral color. Excuse me. Now I'm going to make it a little bit brighter. I'm here in the develop module. I'm going to go back to library. You can stay in develop if you want. I'm going to boost the exposure. Okay, one big click, that was too much. Drag it down. That seems probably fine. If I go into the develop module to see how much I did, right, exposure, it says plus a third, right, 0.3333. So plus 0.3, that's a third. What it's saying is a third of a stop. Remember when we talked about aperture, if you go up a stop or down a stop, you're doubling or halving your exposure. Same thing here, right? So this is why knowing about stops is important. If I say +1, that is adding the equivalent of like one more stop of exposure to this image. I'll just say +1/4. That seems fine. Okay, so if I go back to my grid view, G on the keyboard, library tab, I have two more images that are essentially identical. Now, this happens a lot in commercial photography, right? You'll shoot something with a color chart, you'll take the color chart out, hopefully you don't forget, and then you'll make those images. Now, I'll use that first shot with a color chart in it as a way to balance the color and exposure in those later shots. I could go into develop and be like, okay, it's 0.25 and the temperature is 8300 and -2, and try to remember that and go through and type that into all the other ones. But that, my friends, would be dumb. So let's not do it. I've got that first one selected. Cool. Hold down Shift. Click on the last one. Right? If I hold down Shift, first one selected, everything between it and the second thing I click also selected. So now I have all three of those selected, and important, that first one that I clicked is super selected, right? It's a lighter tone than the other selected images. That means that when I go to copy my adjustments, that's the one it's going to copy from. If I had one of the other ones more selected, it would be copying from that one, and the results would not be what I want. So there we are. First one, super selected. Other two are selected. I can come down here to the bottom and say sync settings. Right? Big old long list of things. You remember this from when we made a preset. Check none, right? Usually there'll be a whole bunch of random stuff selected. Check none to clear all that out. Come up here to white balance. It's still yelling at me about process version. Doesn't matter for this. Cool, white balance, synchronize, and it copies across that. Now what it did not do, if I go to the develop tab, it didn't do my exposure, right? So that was a script. So Command Z, back through here, undo it. Let's try it again. Sync settings and white balance, and also I'll just check all of basic tone. Boom. Now, if I go back through into my develop tab where I can see what the adjustments were, we have plus quarter of a stop, and we are golden. An important thing to remember with white balance is that you can only have one white balance for the whole picture. So if you have mixed sources of lighting, right, which we talked about in the white balance camera taking video thingy, you have to either choose one color of light or the other, and part of the scene will be correct and part of the scene will be different looking. So here we have a photograph of the outside of this building that used to be over on by Bryant Park. It's now been totally, like, a lot of renovation and craziness going on. Don't know why I'm telling you this. Totally doesn't matter. But there is a lobby here that is lit with tungsten light, and the outside was lit by this very late afternoon, very blue evening kind of light. So right now I have it set to balance for that interior light, and it makes the outside super, super, super blue. If I go ahead and balance for that very blue light, now this sort of travertine light-colored stone looks more normal, but the inside looks super, super orange. I cannot get both of those things at the same time looking correct. I have to choose one or the other. In most cases, this is fine. You're going to have like one element that you want to emphasize versus another, and so you'll just choose for that. But keep in mind, like we talked about with white balance and your camera, if your light sources don't all match, then you're going to have a hard time getting everything to look totally neutral, and you're going to have to choose one or the other. When we get into Photoshop in like later semesters, we'll talk about ways that we can solve this a little. But even then, right, if you were like, Brad, here's $100,000, fix this so that the inside and the outside look totally normal, I would be very hard pressed to do it. For $100,000, I would go replace all the light bulbs with a different colored light bulb, reshoot it again, whatever it took. But it's going to be very, very, very difficult. And where we are now, using Lightroom, completely impossible. So keep that in mind when you're shooting, and try to make sure that you have only one color of light in your scene at a time. So that is adjusting white balance and synchronizing white balance. Next up, I'm going to talk a little bit about working with exposure in a more nuanced way.